The hidden dimensions. Within there exist within each of us hidden dimensions, interior territories we have never fully explored, sensations that have accompanied us forever, without our being able to give them a precise name, a persistent impression of being different, of vibrating on a unique frequency. This strangeness you sometimes feel, this subtle disconnect with the rest of the world, is perhaps not the fruit of chance. Have you ever had the impression of carrying something ancient within you, a memory that transcends your personal recollections, an instinctive force that guides your choices without your conscious mind understanding the logic? This sensation is not an illusion. It is the expression of a deeper truth, inscribed in the very substance of your being. You probably know your blood type, A, B, AB, or O. Perhaps even your positive or negative rhesus factor, but have you ever asked yourself what this classification really means? Beyond medical compatibility, beyond blood transfusions, does a hidden language exist in your blood? Carl Jung, pioneer of depth psychology, devoted his life to exploring the collective unconscious. He discovered that we all carry universal archetypes, inherited psychic structures that shape our worldview, our relationships, our deepest fears, and our highest aspirations. These archetypes are not abstract concepts. They live within us, expressing themselves through our behaviors, our dreams, our attachments. What if your blood type were one of the most tangible manifestations of your dominant archetype? What if this red substance circulating in your veins carried within it a symbolic message, a call from the soul, a roadmap toward your becoming? What we are going to explore together is not conventional medical science. It is symbolic psychology, an approach that recognizes that everything in the visible universe possesses an invisible dimension, that every physical fact resonates on a psychic and spiritual plane. Your blood is no exception. In ancient traditions worldwide, blood was considered sacred. Shamans spoke of blood as a vehicle of the spirit. Alchemists saw it as the quintessence of life. Mystics of all cultures understood that blood connects the individual to their ancestors, their lineage, their destiny. Jung himself was deeply interested in correspondences between body and psyche. He knew that our biological inheritances are never neutral on the psychological plane. Each physical characteristic carries a symbolic shadow, an echo in the unconscious, and blood, this interior river that keeps us alive, could only be the bearer of profound meaning. So if you are ready to listen carefully, if you are willing to look beyond appearances, this exploration could reveal aspects of yourself that you have always felt without ever being able to name them. For your blood knows truths that your conscious mind has forgotten. The primordial solitude and the call of the soul. There is a form of solitude that does not depend on external circumstances. You can be surrounded by people who love you, live in a family, have close friends, and yet feel this inexplicable emptiness. This stubborn impression that no one really understands you, not because they don't want to, but because there is something fundamentally different in you. This difference, you may have felt it since childhood. Your emotional reactions were out of sync with those of your surroundings. What deeply touched you left others indifferent. What fascinated them seemed superficial to you. Your internal rhythms did not correspond to collective rhythms. Some of you developed a hypersensitivity that no one understood. You picked up on the unspoken, invisible tensions, underlying emotional currents. This sensitivity was your gift, but also your burden, because the world did not know what to do with it. Others discovered within themselves a raw inner strength, a capacity to endure that their surroundings admired, but did not understand. They saw you as strong, autonomous, indestructible. But no one perceived the price you paid to maintain this facade. Still others carried within them an inexplicable rebellion, an instinctive refusal of norms, structures, social expectations. Not through provocation, but through existential necessity. You simply could not be who you were expected to be. This sensation of strangeness is neither a defect nor a pathology. It is the sign that your psyche bears a specific imprint, an archetypal signature that distinguishes you. And this signature, according to the symbolic approach we are exploring, finds an echo in your biology, in the very composition of your blood. Carl Jung spoke of the collective unconscious as a deep ocean shared by all humanity. In this ocean live universal archetypal forces: the hero, the sage, the innocent, the rebel, the creator. These archetypes are not simple metaphors. They are living structures of the psyche that influence our behaviors, our choices, our relationships. But if these archetypes are universal, their expression is unique in each individual. Your personal history, your family, your culture, but also your biological constitution, all of this colors the way these forces incarnate in you. What if your blood type were one of the biological factors influencing the expression of your dominant archetype? Not in a deterministic way, but as a predisposition, a tendency, a basic tonality upon which the symphony of your personality is built. This idea may seem strange to our modern mentality, which radically separates body and mind. But ancient traditions, and Jung with them, knew that this separation is artificial. We are unified beings. Our psyche inhabits our body. Our biology influences our psychology. And our blood, this vital fluid that touches every cell of our being, cannot but be part of this unity. In a world that values conformity, it is difficult to assume one's difference. We are taught to adapt, to blend into the mold, to silence our particularities. But this difference you carry is not a mistake of nature. It could be precisely the sign that your existence has a unique meaning to fulfill. Your blood carries a memory, not just genetic, but symbolic, a memory of survival, adaptation, evolution. And this memory speaks a language that your conscious mind does not always understand, but that your unconscious intimately recognizes. This forgotten language we are now going to begin to translate. By exploring what Jung might have said about your blood, we open a door toward a deeper understanding of who you truly are. Jung and the symbolism of blood. Carl Jung was not an ordinary doctor. He did not treat symptoms. He explored the depths of the human soul, and in his exploration, he understood a fundamental truth. Everything that exists in the visible world possesses an invisible symbolic dimension. For Jung, blood was not just a liquid transporting oxygen. It was a primordial archetype, a universal symbol charged with psychic and spiritual meanings. In all cultures at all times, blood has always been considered sacred, mysterious, powerful. Look at ancient traditions. In shamanic rituals, blood served to seal pacts with spirits, to mark initiatory passages, to transfer power. Shamans understood that blood was the vehicle of vital force, the link between the visible and the invisible, between body and spirit. In alchemy, which Jung studied intensely, blood represented the prima materia, the primordial substance that had to be transformed to achieve the philosopher's stone. Alchemists were not just talking about chemistry. They were talking about psychic transformation. Blood symbolized the raw matter of the soul that had to be purified, distilled, sublimated. In spiritual traditions worldwide, people speak of blood lineages. For blood connects you to your ancestors, to their strengths, their wounds, their unaccomplished gifts. Contemporary therapists who work with family constellations recognize this truth. We carry within us the memories of our lineage, and these memories influence our lives in often unconscious ways. Jung said, "We were not born today. We were born with a whole history. And blood is the silent carrier of this history. Each drop of blood circulating in you contains information going back generations, centuries, millennia." But Jung went further. He understood that our biological inheritances are never psychologically neutral. Each physical characteristic we carry resonates in our psyche, influences our self-image, our relationships, our place in the world. If you have the eyes of a parent you never knew, this can create an invisible connection with that person. If you inherited the robust constitution of your peasant ancestors, this can influence your relationship with work, effort, endurance. Nothing is insignificant. And blood, this fluid that literally touches every part of your body at every instant, that keeps you alive from your conception to your last breath, how could it not carry profound psychic significance? Blood types, as we know them today, were discovered relatively recently in human history. But their existence goes back to the dawn of our species. Each blood type developed in a specific evolutionary context in response to particular environmental challenges. Type O, the oldest, appeared in the first hunter-gatherers. It is the blood of those who had to survive in a hostile environment, hunt, defend against predators, protect the tribe. Type A appeared later, with the advent of agriculture and the first sedentary societies. It is the blood of those who left nomadic life to build villages, cultivate the land, establish stable social systems. Type B supposedly developed among the nomadic peoples of Central Asia, populations in constant movement, in contact with varied environments, adaptable and creative. Type AB, the rarest and most recent, was born from the encounter between populations carrying type A and those carrying type B. It is literally the blood of mixing, of the union of opposites. These evolutionary contexts left traces, not only in the biochemical composition of blood, but also, according to our symbolic approach, in the psychic constitution of those who carry these different bloods. Each blood type represents a different survival strategy, a specific way of interacting with the world, responding to threats, creating bonds, transmitting life. And these strategies, inscribed in biology, resonate in psychology. Jung would have recognized here a perfect example of what he called synchronicity. This meaningful correspondence between interior and exterior events, between the physical and the psychic, between the biological and the symbolic. Your blood type is not an accident, it is an inheritance, and like all inheritances, it carries both gifts and challenges, strengths and shadows, potentials and pitfalls. In the following chapters, we will explore each blood type in depth, not to confine you to a category, but to offer you a symbolic mirror, a tool for self-understanding. For to know oneself, Jung said, is the beginning of healing. Type O, the primordial warrior. Let us begin with the oldest, most widespread type, type O. There is something powerful and primitive in this blood. a raw force that seems to come from before civilization, before social laws, from a time when survival depended solely on instinct, will, and courage. Type O is the blood of the first humans, of those who survived the most extreme conditions our planet has ever known. Hunters who tracked game over thousands of kilometers, fighters who defended their clan against predators and rival tribes, leaders who had to make instantaneous decisions upon which lives depended. This ancestral memory has not disappeared. It still lives in those who carry type O. Not literally, of course, but symbolically, archetypally. It is an energetic signature, a psychic predisposition. Psychologically, type O individuals often carry the archetype of the warrior, not necessarily in the military sense, but in the Jungian sense, one who enters the arena of life with fierce determination, a will to conquer, to protect, to transform. This warrior energy manifests in multiple ways. It can be the business leader who builds their empire with implacable determination, the mother who defends her children with absolute ferocity, the athlete who pushes their limits to the extreme, the activist who fights for a cause with devouring passion. But beneath this appearance of strength often hides a profound solitude, for the warrior cannot show weakness. They must remain strong for others. They must hold the line, even when crumbling internally. This constant pressure creates intense psychic tension. Type O tends to carry the world on their shoulders. They feel responsible, even when it is not their role. They intervene, protect, save. But who protects the protector? Who saves the savior? This question, type O often flees, because answering it would mean admitting their vulnerability, and vulnerability seems to be the opposite of strength. But Jung teaches us that this logic is false. True strength does not come from denying vulnerability, but from consciously integrating it. The hero who refuses to recognize their weaknesses always ends up being defeated by them. This is what Jung called the shadow of the hero. The warrior who fights all battles ends up becoming a prisoner of war. They no longer know how to live without conflict. They create enemies where there are none. They transform every situation into combat, every relationship into a power struggle. In romantic relationships, type O can be magnetic. Their presence is strong, their charisma undeniable, their capacity for protection reassuring. But they can also become domineering, controlling, incapable of letting go. For letting go means losing control, and losing control awakens ancestral fears of death, annihilation. Type O is often afraid of true intimacy because intimacy requires vulnerability. So they create relationships where they remain in a position of strength, the protector and the protected, the strong and the weak, the leader and the follower. But these dynamics, while secure, prevent them from accessing an authentic connection of equals. Their anger is also an important aspect of their shadow. Type O often feels intense rage, sometimes disproportionate to situations. This anger comes from accumulated frustrations, unexpressed needs, disrespected boundaries. But instead of understanding the message of this anger, they repress it or explode destructively. Jung said that unconscious anger becomes destructive, but conscious anger becomes transformative. For type O, learning to feel their anger without fearing it, to express it constructively, to use it as a compass toward their true needs, this is an essential key to transformation. The profound lesson of type O is to learn that true power resides not in domination, but in authenticity. that protecting others begins with protecting oneself, that leading does not mean controlling, but inspiring, that ultimate strength is that which can welcome gentleness without feeling threatened. When Type O begins this integration work, something remarkable happens. The solitary warrior becomes a wise leader. Raw strength becomes tranquil power. Combat instinct becomes discernment. The need to dominate becomes the capacity to empower others. Type O then discovers that they do not need to carry the world on their shoulders to have value, that their presence alone, without the warrior's masks, is sufficient. That shared vulnerability creates deeper bonds than exhibited strength. It is then that they access their true potential, becoming not the warrior who fights, but the healer who transforms. No longer one who imposes their strength, but one who inspires through their integrity. The accomplished Type O is no longer at war with the world. They are at peace with themselves, and from this inner peace emerges an authentic strength that no longer seeks to prove anything. Type A, the guardian of order. Let us now observe Type A, diametrically different from Type O in its expression, but equally profound in its complexities. Where Type O is instinct and action, Type A is reflection and structure. Where one charges forward, the other plans. Where one fights, the other organizes. Type A appeared with the advent of agriculture, about 10,000 years ago. This is a crucial moment in human history when our ancestors left the nomadic life of hunter-gatherers to settle down, cultivate the land, build permanent villages. This transformation was not just economic or social. It was profoundly psychological. For sedentary life requires different qualities from nomadic life. One must plan sowings and harvests. One must store resources for winter. One must establish common rules for living together. One must anticipate, organize, preserve. This collective memory of order, structure, anticipation is symbolically inscribed in Type A. It is the blood of those who built civilization as we know it, with its laws, institutions, traditions. Psychologically, Type A individuals often carry the archetype of the guardian of order, values, traditions, stability. They are the ones who keep structures standing, who maintain social cohesion, who ensure continuity. In a family, it is often Type A who remembers birthdays, who organizes gatherings, who maintains connections. In a company, it is they who create systems, who ensure follow-through, who verify that everything functions correctly. In society, they are the guardians of laws, procedures, fairness. This organizational capacity is an immense strength. The world needs guardians. But like all archetypes, this one also possesses a shadow, and this shadow can be crushing. For the guardian carries an invisible burden, responsibility. Type A feels responsible for everything and everyone. They anticipate problems before they arrive. They worry about those they love. They check and recheck. They cannot completely relax because their mind is constantly searching for what could go wrong. This chronic anxiety is not a character weakness. It is the manifestation of an archetype that evolved in a context where anticipation was a matter of survival. If you do not plant the harvests, your community starves the following winter. This ancestral pressure still lives in the psyche of Type A. Jung spoke of the conflict between the social ego and the authentic self. The social ego is the personality we construct to be accepted, to meet expectations, to function in society. The authentic self is our deep nature, our true needs, our real desires. For Type A, this conflict is particularly intense. for their entire archetype pushes them toward the social ego, being responsible, reliable, correct, up to par. But the authentic self whispers something else: the need for spontaneity, freedom, unfiltered emotional expression. This tension often creates a life that appears perfectly controlled on the surface, but internally crossed by silent storms. Type A smiles when suffering, says "I'm fine" when everything is collapsing, carries their burdens alone because asking for help would mean admitting they are not living up to their role as guardian. Perfectionism is another classic manifestation of Type A's shadow. Nothing is ever good enough. They review their emails 10 times. They worry about having said something inappropriate in a conversation from 3 days ago. They judge themselves harshly for errors that no one else noticed. This perfectionism comes from the deep belief that their value depends on their performance. That if they do not do things correctly, they will be rejected, abandoned, considered useless. This belief is rarely conscious, but it governs a large part of their behaviors. In relationships, Type A is often loyal, stable, devoted. They are the partner one can count on, who will be there in difficult times, who will keep their commitments. But they can also become suffocating, controlling, rigid. For the guardian needs order, and emotions are disorderly. Love is unpredictable. Passion is chaotic. So Type A often tries to structure even love to make it safe, predictable, controllable. But authentic love resists these domestication attempts. Type A fears abandonment, so they try to be indispensable. They give too much, do too much, sacrifice too much. But this dynamic creates resentment, for they give without asking, then expect the other to guess their unexpressed needs. When this does not happen, they feel misunderstood, unappreciated, alone despite their self-giving. Type A's anger is particularly toxic because it is repressed. Unlike Type O, who explodes, Type A contains until the pressure becomes unbearable. Then they implode into depression or explode disproportionately over minor details. Jung would teach us that this anger contains a crucial message: boundaries that have not been respected, including by oneself. The anger says, stop carrying what is not yours to carry. Stop sacrificing your needs for others. Stop betraying yourself to be loved. The profound lesson of Type A is to learn letting go, not the abandonment of all responsibility, but the understanding that true order does not come from control, but from trust. That life possesses its own intelligence, its own organization, and that it is not necessary to manage everything for things to function. When Type A begins to honor their own needs without guilt, something miraculous happens. Anxiety diminishes. Relationships become more authentic. Creativity emerges. For all the energy that was invested in control becomes available for life itself. Type A then discovers that they can be guardians of meaning rather than guardians of order, that they can preserve what is essential without exhausting themselves, controlling what is secondary, that their true mission is not to hold the world up through force of will, but to create spaces where life can naturally flourish. Type B, the nomadic creator. And now let us explore Type B, perhaps the most mysterious, most misunderstood of the 4 blood types. There is in Type B an elusive quality, an energy that refuses to be domesticated, a soul that seems to belong to other dimensions. Historically, Type B supposedly appeared among the nomadic peoples of Central Asia, populations who lived in constant movement, crossing vast and varied territories, in contact with changing environments, diverse cultures, unpredictable challenges. This nomadic life required exceptional adaptability. One had to be able to read the signs of nature, sense weather changes, understand invisible dynamics. One had to be creative in solutions, intuitive in decisions, flexible in strategies. This nomadic memory lives in the psyche of Type B. It is the blood of those who cannot stay in place, not through instability, but through the necessity of exploration, of those who perceive dimensions that others do not see, of those who create, dream, imagine. The dominant archetype of Type B is the wandering creator, the poet who travels from city to city, the artist who can only create in absolute freedom, the mystic who seeks truth beyond established dogmas, the visionary who sees possibilities that no one else perceives. This creative energy is an immense blessing. Type B brings to the world beauty, innovation, new perspectives. They are the ones who question the status quo, who explore new paths, who push the boundaries of what is possible. But this freedom has a price. For the world in which we live values stability, predictability, conformity. The educational system rewards those who follow rules. The working world favors those who adapt to existing structures. Society expects us to settle down, to build, to stay. And Type B feels all of this as a prison. Fixed schedules suffocate them. Routines empty them. Social obligations weigh on them, not through laziness or irresponsibility, but because their soul needs movement, spontaneity, space to breathe. This tension often creates a profound sense of inadequacy. Type B wonders, why is it so difficult for me to do what everyone does naturally? Why can't I simply be content with a normal life? Jung would answer that this difficulty is not a defect, but a signal. The signal that your soul is calling you toward another path, that your deep nature demands to be honored, that your mission in this life is not to conform, but to create something unique. The individuation process, this path of the soul toward its wholeness, takes for Type B the form of a necessary wandering, not a flight, but a quest. An exploration of exterior territories that reflects an exploration of interior territories. In relationships, this dynamic becomes particularly complex. Type B deeply desires connection, intimacy, love, but they equally fear being trapped, possessed, controlled. So they oscillate between moments of total openness, intense emotional fusion, and moments of sudden withdrawal, need for space, flight. This behavior is often perceived by partners as instability, immaturity, fear of commitment. But in reality, it is the expression of a profound archetypal conflict, the desire for belonging versus the need for freedom. And for Type B, these two needs are equally essential. Type B often attracts partners who want to stabilize them, to save them from their wandering, to offer them a home. But these attempts encounter fierce resistance, because Type B instinctively senses that this stabilization would equal a symbolic death of their essence. Their creativity can also become a form of escape. Instead of confronting emotional difficulties, they take refuge in their inner worlds, in their projects, in their dreams. They create magnificent universes in their imagination, but struggle to embody their visions in concrete reality. This tendency toward flight can manifest in multiple ways. Constant changing of projects without ever finishing anything, frequent moves, brief but intense relationships, avoidance of necessary confrontations, spirituality used as an escape rather than as a transformation tool. Jung spoke of shadow integration as the path toward wholeness. For type B, the shadow often contains everything that is dense, structured, grounded. They have projected onto the material world an image of prison, when matter could be the terrain where their visions take form. The profound lesson of type B is to learn that authentic freedom does not come from the absence of commitment, but from the capacity to commit consciously. That anchoring is not a prison, but a foundation. That creating bridges between their inner world and the outer world enriches both. When type B begins to accept that their uniqueness is an offering and not a fault, everything changes. They stop apologizing for being different. They fully assume their creative, intuitive, exploratory nature. But they also learn to finish what they start, to honor their commitments, to build flexible structures that support their creativity instead of hindering it. Type B then discovers that they can be both free and committed, creative and responsible, dreamer and grounded. They become the messenger between worlds, one who brings back treasures from the invisible to offer to the visible. Their wandering ceases to be a flight to become a sacred quest, and in this transformation, they finally find their place, not by conforming to the world, but by creating a world where their uniqueness can flourish. Type AB, the alchemist of contradictions. We now arrive at the rarest, most complex, most mysterious of blood types, type AB. If you carry this blood, you already know what it means to live with a divided heart, a soul that contains contradictory universes, an identity that refuses to be simply defined. Type AB was born from the encounter between type A and type B. On the biological plane, it is a unique combination. On the symbolic plane, it is the incarnation of the living paradox. Type AB contains within it the two opposing energies, order and freedom, structure and spontaneity, reason and intuition, the need for belonging and the desire for solitude. This union of opposites is not a simple addition. It is an alchemy, a fusion that creates something entirely new. Type AB is neither A nor B, and yet it is both simultaneously. This duality is its curse and its blessing. Psychologically, AB individuals often live with constant inner tension. One day, they are organized, rational, structured, like type A. The next day, they are creative, impulsive, intuitive, like type B. This alternation can be disconcerting, not only for their surroundings, but especially for themselves. Who am I really? This question often haunts type AB, for inside it is often war. One part of them wants stability, the other freedom. One part seeks control, the other lets go. One part analyzes everything, the other feels everything. And in the midst of these contradictory voices, silence, indecision, identity confusion, Jung said that the ultimate goal of life is not to eliminate contradictions, but to consciously contain them, to find what he called the stable center in the midst of chaos, to become capable of holding opposing tensions without being torn apart by them. And this is precisely the entire path of type AB. Their archetype is that of the alchemist, one who must transform the lead of contradiction into the gold of integrated consciousness. But this alchemical work is one of the most difficult there is. For before being able to integrate opposites, one must first recognize them, accept them, honor them both. Type AB often tends to want to choose a side, to define themselves as either A or B, to escape the discomfort of contradiction. But this attempt is doomed to failure, because it denies an essential part of their being. Some type ABs develop a dominant A personality. They become hyper-controlled, organized, rational. But their repressed B part haunts them through sudden impulses, strange dreams, desires they do not understand. Others develop a dominant B personality. They embrace creativity, intuition, freedom. But their repressed A part catches up with them through anxiety, the need for security, guilt about not being responsible enough. In both cases, the repressed half becomes the shadow that sabotages conscious life. Jung taught that what is not conscious manifests as destiny. And for type AB, ignoring their duality inevitably leads to identity crises, collapses, moments when the personality they have constructed cracks to reveal what they have tried to hide. In relationships, type AB is particularly complex. They have a profound need for emotional connection, intimacy, fusion. But simultaneously, they need space, distance, protection of their inner world. These two apparently contradictory needs create a difficult relational dance. Type AB's partner often does not know where they stand. One moment, type AB is totally present, open, vulnerable. The next moment, they close off brutally, become distant, inaccessible. This alternation is not manipulation. It is the expression of an authentic inner conflict. Type AB feels everything with remarkable intensity. They pick up on emotional subtleties that others miss. They understand human paradoxes. They see nuances where others see black and white. This sensitivity is a gift, but it can also be overwhelming. To protect themselves from this emotional overload, type AB often develops a mask of control. They appear balanced, self-possessed, serene. But beneath this mask, it is often chaos. Contradictory emotions colliding, opposing desires neutralizing each other, fears fighting each other. The risk for type AB is to become elusive, not only for others, but for themselves, to lose themselves in their contradictions, to become a chameleon that changes color according to situations, but no longer knows what their true color is. Jung spoke of the self as the totality that contains all opposites. The self is not the conscious personality, this small ego that believes itself separate. The self is this vaster reality that encompasses conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, masculine and feminine, order and chaos. For type AB, the path of individuation consists of discovering this integrating self, of ceasing to want to be coherent at all costs, of accepting that their richness comes precisely from their complexity, of understanding that contradiction is not a problem to solve, but a dynamic to honor. When type AB begins to fully embrace their paradoxes, a remarkable transformation occurs. They stop fragmenting themselves to please others or conform to expectations. They become a living bridge between apparently opposite worlds. The integrated type AB possesses a unique capacity for understanding others, for they contain within themselves the different human polarities. They can authentically connect with very diverse personalities. They understand type A's need for structure and type B's need for freedom. They can be both rational and intuitive, stable and spontaneous, depending on what the situation demands. This conscious flexibility is very different from unconscious instability. It is a mastery of the dance between opposites, a capacity to navigate between polarities without being swept away by them. Type AB then discovers that their mission is not to choose between A and B, but to become AB in its fullness, the living union of light and dark, known and unknown, manifested and potential. They become the alchemist who transforms contradiction into creativity, conflict into compassion, duality into wisdom. Relational dances. Love. According to your blood, love is probably the territory where our archetypes reveal themselves with the most intensity. For in intimacy, we cannot maintain masks for very long. Our deep needs, our buried fears, our unhealed wounds, everything rises to the surface. What if your blood type influenced not only your way of loving, but also the types of relationships you attract, the patterns you repeat, the crises you go through? Let us now explore the relational signatures of each blood type, not to confine you to categories, but to offer you a reading grid, a tool for understanding your love patterns. Type O enters love as they enter life, with intensity, passion, determination. When type O loves, they love totally. There is no half measure. It is all or nothing. This intensity can be magnetic, intoxicating, transformative. But beneath this passion often hides a power dynamic. Type O needs to feel they maintain a certain control, a certain strength in the relationship, not necessarily consciously or maliciously, but instinctively. For completely letting go of control awakens in them archaic fears of vulnerability, weakness, symbolic death. Type O often unconsciously seeks partners they can protect, guide, save. This dynamic allows them to remain in their position of strength while expressing their love, but it creates imbalances. Type O's partner may feel suffocated, infantilized, diminished. When Type O feels betrayed, devalued, or abandoned, their reaction can be brutal. They can become distant, cold, even cruel. This is their way of protecting themselves, regaining control, not showing how hurt they are. But this reaction pushes away precisely what they need: connection, understanding, love. What Type O is really seeking in love, even if they cannot express it, is someone who sees their hidden vulnerability without judging it, who understands that beneath the warrior hides a tender heart, who can receive their protection without becoming dependent, who can offer them a safe space where they do not need to be strong all the time. Type A loves with caution. Love for them is a serious thing that must be carefully constructed, stone by stone. They do not like unpredictability, emotional chaos, passionate roller coasters. They seek stability, security, predictability. At the beginning of a relationship, Type A can seem cold, distant, too cerebral. But it is not that they do not feel. It is that they are afraid. Afraid of losing control but loving. Afraid of being abandoned if they give themselves completely. Afraid of the emotional chaos that a relationship can trigger. So they move slowly, cautiously. They observe, evaluate, build. They need clear markers, explicit commitment, reassuring routines. Once they feel secure, they can become the most devoted, loyal, stable partner there is. But this devotion has a price. Type A tends to give too much, do too much, forget themselves too much. They anticipate the other's needs, organize, manage, take care, but they forget to take care of themselves. They forget to express their own needs. They expect the other to guess what they do not say. This dynamic creates resentment. Type A feels unappreciated, unrecognized, taken for granted. But since they have difficulty expressing their needs directly, they do so passive-aggressively, subtle reproaches, heavy silences, silent martyrdom. In conflict, Type A avoids direct confrontation as much as possible. They prefer the unspoken, maintaining apparent harmony, even if it means stifling their true feelings. But these repressed emotions end up exploding, often disproportionately, over minor details. What type A truly hopes for in love is a partner who allows them to breathe, who gives them permission to be imperfect, to let go, not to control everything, who values who they are, not just what they do, who creates a space where they can finally relax, rest, simply be. Type B loves as they dream, without borders, without limits, without rules. When Type B falls in love, it is total fusion, a soul-to-soul connection, an encounter that seems to transcend time and space. Love for them is not a social construction. It is a mystical experience. Type B is attracted to singular, mysterious, profound, free beings. They seek someone who can understand their inner worlds, who can travel with them in invisible dimensions, who will not judge them for their difference. At first, the relationship with a Type B can seem magical. They are totally present, intensely connected, creative in their expression of love. But as soon as the relationship becomes too structured, too routine, too predictable, something in them begins to suffocate. Type B is allergic to routine. They need space, novelty, surprise. Not because they get bored easily, but because their soul needs movement to breathe. When they feel the relationship becoming a cage, even a gilded one, their flight instinct activates. This flight can take different forms. Sometimes it is physical. They disappear. They need alone time. They travel. Sometimes it is emotional. They close off, become distant, inaccessible. Sometimes it is mental. They are physically present, but their mind is elsewhere, in their creations, their dreams, their inner worlds. This dynamic is particularly difficult for partners who need security and constancy. They do not understand these sudden needs for space. They interpret them as rejection, abandonment, lack of love. But for Type B, this need for space is not against the other. It is for themselves. Type B often suffers from loneliness despite their flights, for they deeply desire connection, but they fear confinement. They want to be seen in their totality, but they are afraid of being possessed. They seek union, but they flee fusion. What Type B truly expects in love is a partner who respects their need for freedom without interpreting it as rejection, who can create a relationship flexible enough to accommodate their natural movement, who understands that their love is not less deep because they need space, who can be stable without being rigid, present without being suffocating. Type AB, finally, loves in complexity. They need intense emotional proximity and protective distance simultaneously. This apparent contradiction makes their relationships particularly complicated. Type AB feels everything with remarkable intensity. When they love deeply, totally, with every fiber of their being. But they also close off brutally if they sense their fragile inner balance is threatened. They are both passionate and controlled, generous and mistrustful, open and closed. This alternation can be disconcerting for the partner who never really knows what to expect. One day, Type AB is completely available. The next day, they are in their inaccessible bubble. Type AB is often afraid of losing themselves in love, for their identity boundary is already blurred, their internal limits already uncertain. So fusion with the other can seem to threaten their fragile integrity. They need love, but fear being dissolved by it. This fear often leads them to create distance even in proximity. They share much but keep the essential hidden. They show certain facets but fiercely protect others. They let the other in up to a certain point, then close the door. What Type AB is fundamentally seeking in love is a relationship where they can be all that they are, without having to fragment themselves, where their contradictions are accepted, their complexities celebrated, their paradoxes honored, where they do not need to choose between proximity and distance, but can navigate between the two according to their needs. Jung said that true love begins when one accepts the other's shadow, and your blood type, with its archetypal wounds, its instinctive impulses, and its deep fears, reveals precisely the shadow you carry in your relationships. Understanding this does not guarantee perfect relationships, but it allows you to stop unconsciously repeating the same patterns, to recognize your patterns, to enter relationships with more consciousness, to choose compatible partners not superficially, but archetypally. The hidden shadows, what your blood refuses to see. There exists within each of us a territory we refuse to explore, aspects of ourselves that we judge unacceptable, that we push into darkness, that we fiercely deny. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not a demonic entity to be fought. It is simply everything we had to repress to be accepted, loved, to survive psychologically. It is the aggressiveness we were taught to hide under kindness, the sensuality stifled under control, the need for love disguised as self-sufficiency, the vulnerability masked as strength, and your blood, in its symbolic language, knows this shadow. It expresses it through your resistances, your blockages, your disproportionate emotional triggers, your repetitive patterns. Each blood type carries its own specific shadow, its psychic flip side. Understanding this shadow is not an exercise in judgment or self-flagellation. It is, on the contrary, the beginning of liberation. For as Jung said, what is not conscious manifests as destiny. Type O's shadow is the shadow of power and control. On the surface, Type O wants to protect, guide, serve. Their intentions seem noble, but in the shadow often hides a need to dominate, control, maintain a position of superiority. This power dynamic is not necessarily malevolent. It comes from the deep fear of being weak, vulnerable, dependent. Type O learned very early, often in childhood, that showing vulnerability was dangerous. Perhaps because they had to become strong too soon. Perhaps because they saw the adults around them collapse and they had to hold things together for everyone. So they built a fortress. They developed an apparently unshakable strength. But this fortress became a prison. For by refusing their vulnerability, Type O cuts themselves off from tenderness, authentic intimacy, the possibility of being supported by others. Their shadow also manifests in repressed anger that becomes rage, in the need to win that becomes toxic competition, in protection that becomes possessiveness. Type O can become hard, insensitive, incapable of compassion toward themselves and toward others they perceive as weak. Jung would teach us that behind this hardness hides an immense fear, the fear of abandonment, betrayal, the symbolic death that losing control represents. Integrating this shadow means for Type O recognizing this fear, accepting it, and discovering that true strength resides in the capacity to be consciously vulnerable. Type A's shadow is the shadow of perfectionism and resentment. On the surface, Type A wants to do well, be up to par, maintain harmony. But in the shadow often boils intense anger, deep resentment, existential fatigue. This anger comes from the fact that Type A gives enormously without ever asking. They carry responsibilities that are not theirs. They sacrifice themselves for others. They maintain structures single-handedly. but no one seems to see what they do. No one thanks them enough. No one takes care of them as they take care of others. But type A cannot express this anger directly, because it would contradict their image as a composed, responsible, self-possessed person. So they contain it, repress it, transform it into anxiety, obsessive perfectionism, judgment of others who do not do things correctly. Their shadow manifests in excessive control that suffocates spontaneity, in unexpressed expectations that create disappointments, in rigidity that refuses adaptability. Type A can become critical, rigid, incapable of accepting imperfection, their own and others. Beneath this shadow hides the chaos they desperately try to contain. For type A is afraid of disorder, unpredictability, everything that escapes their control. They have built their entire identity on their capacity to maintain order. So recognizing inner chaos seems to equal self-annihilation. Integrating this shadow means for type A accepting that chaos is part of life, that disorder is sometimes creative, that imperfection is human. It is daring to express their needs, even if it creates tensions. It is recognizing their anger as a legitimate message about their disrespected boundaries. Type B's shadow is the shadow of flight and irresponsibility. On the surface, type B seeks truth, authenticity, freedom. But in the shadow often hides an avoidance of difficult emotions, a flight from concrete responsibilities, an inability to anchor. This flight is a protection strategy developed in the face of a world that seems too dense, too heavy, too suffocating. Type B discovered they could escape pain by fleeing into their inner worlds, into creativity, into travels, into dreams. But this strategy has a cost, for by constantly fleeing, type B never truly resolves their problems. They leave them behind, but they always catch up. They build nothing lasting because they leave before things become too real. Their shadow manifests in chronic instability, in abandoned projects, in relationships interrupted as soon as they become demanding. Type B can become elusive, unreliable, incapable of commitment, perpetually in search of a perfection that does not exist. Beneath this shadow hides the fear of confinement, but also, more deeply, the fear of confronting themselves. For as long as type B is in movement, they do not have to face their deep wounds, their existential fears, their fundamental sense of loneliness. Integrating this shadow means for type B learning that anchoring is not a prison, but a foundation. That conscious commitment is not a limitation of freedom, but an expression of it. That sometimes staying and going through discomfort is more courageous than leaving. Type AB's shadow is the shadow of the mask and fragmentation. On the surface, type AB is complex, subtle, balanced, but in the shadow often hides profound identity confusion, an impossibility to be authentically themselves, a painful psychic fragmentation. This fragmentation comes from the necessity of managing contradictory energies. To avoid being torn apart by their own paradoxes, type AB often develops different personalities for different situations. They become chameleons, adapting their mask according to the environment. But this adaptability becomes problematic when they lose contact with their authentic center, when they no longer know who they really are beneath all these masks, when they become prisoners of their own protection strategies. Their shadow manifests in opacity, in the inability to be truly known, in behavioral contradictions that bewilder their surroundings. Type AB can become manipulative, not through malevolence, but simply because they have lost the thread of their own truth. beneath this shadow hides the unresolved inner conflict between the different parts of themselves. Type AB has never truly made peace with their contradictions. They constantly try to hide them, manage them, control them. But these contradictions refuse to be silenced. Integrating this shadow means for type AB accepting that they are fundamentally paradoxical, that this is not a defect, but their essential nature, that their mission is not to resolve the contradiction, but to become the conscious alchemist who transforms duality into creative wholeness. Jung taught that shadow work is the most difficult and most necessary work of a lifetime. For as long as the shadow remains unconscious, it controls us from behind the scenes. It sabotages our relationships, undermines our projects, creates the very situations we most fear. But when we turn toward the shadow, when we recognize it, accept it, integrate it, something miraculous happens. The energy that was trapped in repression becomes available for life. The parts of ourselves we rejected become sources of strength. The contradictions we fought become creative tensions. Your blood type, in its symbolic language, shows you the path toward your specific shadow, not to condemn you, but to liberate you. For in the shadow lies not only what you fear, but also what you most need to become whole.